And so the first resulting shifts that we're going to look at due to globalization, but more specifically modern globalization, more recent globalization, is technological advances in two different areas. First off, increasing communication flow. So in terms of the amount of information and the speed that information can flow from one place to another is accelerated beyond belief. And so that's been overwhelmingly due to fiber optics. And so slowly but surely these fiber optic cables are being laid, and they're much cheaper, faster, and more effective than the previous more copper-based network that we used to have. And so across the Atlantic Ocean, there's fiber optic lines that connect North America to Europe. And so, you know, these fiber optic lines allow for fast, very, very fast flow of information, whether it be digital or audio, whatever, from one place to another. Also key is satellites, and so first off, television, and so no longer do you have to have, you know, to be linked up to a cable in a cable box to receive cable television. Now you can be anywhere in the world. If you have a satellite, you can watch TV. And so a little bit later on, we'll talk about the digital divide and the role of television in spreading information. But as far as television, satellites being able to spread information at a very, very fast rate all throughout the globe. Also, kind of interesting things, there's actually a firm who will launch a personal satellite for you, and so you can have your own satellite that'll be launched up into the sky. I don't know what you would really want to do with that, but you could be able to store your own information, and so the idea here is in the future you won't need, you know, to have an actual card to swipe every time you use your credit card. You'll be able just to beam the information up from your own personal satellite. Pretty far out there, but pretty interesting. Also, the role of mobile phones, and so cellular phones. No longer you have to be tied to a landline. So when we look at more rural areas, especially rural areas in developing countries, and so let's look at Africa. And so what's happening is the Maasai in Kenya. They're hunters and gatherers. They're herders, and so they have a bunch of cattle. And so in the old days, they used to, you know, round up all their cattle, take them to market, bring them all to market, and they get there and they find out that they don't need them all, or maybe there was only, you know, demand for a couple. What they can do now is access their mobile phone, go ahead and call into the market and say, hey, what do you need? How many cattle do you need? And so Africa, this area of the world that doesn't have a large interconnected, telephone network, well, mobile phones, the technology can get around that issue, can get around that hurdle. Also, the role of science and medicine. So this is in collaborations, and so I've started to notice more international collaborations in which people who work on a certain, let's say, a certain specific disease, can take the expertise from India, can take the expertise from Europe, can take the expertise of the United States, Canada, whatever, and they can share information. And so another interesting thing is I have several colleagues within the geography department here, and there will be times where they'll be interacting with people on the other side of the country, or they'll be interacting with people in India, and they're doing this all from their laptop, all from here on campus in IUPUI. And so with Skype, with the internet, it's much easier for these collaborations to happen, and we're going to see the benefits of those collaborations, hopefully with the end of cancers and with the end of AIDS and so forth. So the previous slide we looked at technological advancements and their impact on communication. Now we're going to look at transportation in particular. And so first off, the transportation, the advancements, as far as getting from one place to another, especially with the airlines, is we have greater access to remote or previously inaccessible areas. And so, if I wanted to go to Mongolia, the old days, I mean, just imagine the time that it would take to get from here in Indianapolis all the way to Mongolia. But now, I could probably be there in 24 hours. Hop a plane, get a connection to Chicago, get a connection to Beijing or Tokyo, then boom, I'm in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. And so, places that were previously seen to be more too remote, we have much greater access to today. And also, that very efficient travel as far as getting from one place to another. And so today, it's much easier to move money, materials, people, ideas, culture, technology, products, drugs, music, whatever, across the world. And a way to kind of showcase this is look at time. Look at how over time we've seen the changes it takes to get from one place to another. And so in 1492, it took Columbus's crew about 37 days to cross the Atlantic Ocean. And then in 1912, the Titanic was supposed to take only 5 days to cross that same Atlantic Ocean. And then by 1927, Charles Lindbergh took him 33 and a half non-stop hours to fly across the Atlantic from Paris to New York City. And so in 1962, John Glenn took him 5 hours to circle the Earth 3 times. Another way to illustrate this is I have several different international students. I've got one of my more recent ones is from Nigeria. And so I asked him, I go, how long did it take you to get from Nigeria to the United States on your travels to come to school here? And he said, oh, about 18 hours. And just to think, going from Nigeria, the interior of Africa, and making a connection flight to Amsterdam, and then from Amsterdam to New York City. It only took 18 hours to get from there to here. And it's very, very interesting. Here we have isoline maps, which don't see too often in human geography. But what it does is it showcases how long it would take to travel from downtown New York City to all these places beyond New York. And so we can see as far as that isoline, so we can see that line going somewhat through Indiana, right through the middle of Indiana. We can see, follow that line all the way down, and it says 5 weeks. So what that means is it would take 5 weeks in 1800 to get from New York City to Indiana. Now we look at the transformation as far as a new technology comes in this case railroad, and now look how changes have definitely occurred. And now it takes 5 weeks to get from New York City to the opposite coast. And so once again, transportation advancements, we can see how historically how they changed the game, but they're only going to continue to advance and then make it even easier, but also quicker to get from one place to another. And now just 130 years after that very first map, now to get from New York, you can get across the country in essentially less than a day. And so that's, of course, the advancements in transportation. So when we see the future, who knows what's going to be, how we get around. Who knows what it's going to look like. But there's no doubt it's going to just continue to be quicker and easier to travel distances. And so we've talked about technological advances for transportation and communication. Well, what's the net result? And the thing we're going to focus in on now is increased spatial interaction. And anytime you see the word spatial, just increase, in its place, put geographic or geographical. And so increased geographical interaction. What does this mean? This means interconnectivity or interrelatedness between places is much higher. And so what previously, we talked about as far as, the role of distance in preventing ideas or preventing access to ideas. And so this all has a term that we use in geography, and if you could come in and take higher level classes, you'll come across this, and that's space-time compression, also referred to as the time-space convergence. And essentially what this means is the time and distance separating two places decreases due to the improvements in technology that we've talked about prior. So the role of the internet, the role of transportation, the role of airplanes, the role of more more airports being added in new places allows more interconnection. And so we can also think about this as the decreasing friction of distance. No longer does distance have a way of making things much more complicated, much more difficult to get from one place to another, or to access another culture. And so we have a lot of these removals of previous barriers to interaction. So think about YouTube. Think about Facebook. Think about how these advancements in social interaction. How it's so easy to share ideas. It's so easy to see and find new cultures, and to embrace and to learn about new cultures. And so that's the framework we're going to go next, is looking at the impact of these technological advancements on our social life.